Hey, how's it going? My name is Wes. Welcome back to another lesson. In the previous lesson, we went over the verb ser, and we saw that the verb ser is used when we talk about characteristics. In today's lesson, we are going to go over the other verb which also means to be, which is the verb estar. And we use the verb estar when we talk about states. So in today's lesson, we are going to go over the different conjugations of the verb estar, and we are going to see examples of how we use the verb estar. Alright, so now just as a reminder of the previous lesson, if we are talking about a characteristic, we'll use a conjugation of the verb ser. So, for example, I am a man is yo soy un hombre. So soy is the I form of ser. However, in today's lesson, we will learn that if we are talking about a state, so for example, I am tired, which is a state, it's not a characteristic because I'm not going to be tired forever. So it's a state. So when we talk about a state, we don't say yo soy cansado, I am tired, but instead of using the verb ser, so instead of using soy, we say yo estoy cansado, which is the I form of the verb estar. And I could understand that this might be a lot to wrap your head around right now, but don't worry, we will go over this new verb and include some examples and practice them so that you understand the difference of when to use ser and when to use estar. Alright, so let's get into today's lesson. Now, as always, we start by making our graph, so you can pause the video right now if you want to make a copy of this and then press play again once you're ready. Alright, so let's start with the first conjugation, which is the I form. So I am, again in the previous lesson we saw that I am, when we talk about a characteristic, is yo soy. However, if we were talking about a state and we use the verb estar, it becomes yo estoy. Yo estoy. I am.
Yo estoy. Yo estoy.
Alright, so as an example, when we say I am here, for example, we are talking about a state. We're not talking about a characteristic because I am here right now, but I'm not going to be here forever. And so anytime we talk about location, for example, we are talking about a state. And so we will use this verb estar. So yo aquí becomes yo estoy aquí.
Yo estoy aquí.
I am here.
Yo estoy aquí.
Alright, then the next conjugation is
Tú estás. Tú estás.
and notice the accent on the A here. It's actually very important that you put the accent here. Tú estás. You are. So we can write this down in our notes as well. So let's make it a question. And let's say, are you tired?
Tú, cansado. ¿Tú estás cansado? ¿Tú estás cansado?
Are you tired? And we are saying cansado, which ends with an O. But how about if you would speak to a female person? How would you then say, are you tired? So if you're talking to a female person, cansado becomes cansada.
¿Tú estás cansada?
Are you tired?
¿Tú estás cansada?
So this is always something that we want to keep in the back of our minds, that if we talk to a feminine person, we need to change the ending of a word. I remember when I first moved to Spain and I forgot to change encantado into encantada. So anytime I would meet a female person, I would say encantado. And of course, they understood what I was trying to say. I was trying to say it's a pleasure to meet you. But what I was really saying is it's a pleasure to meet you, but assuming that they were men instead of women. So when I realized that I had been making that mistake after a couple of weeks, I was quite embarrassed of myself. But hey, it's all part of the learning journey. Alright, next conjugation is
Él, ella, usted, está.
with the accent on the A. So not esta, but está.
Él está. Ella está. Usted está.
He, she, is, or you formal are. So he is at the park. Again, we are talking about a state. Is
Él en el parque. Él en el parque. Él está en el parque. Él está en el parque.
and in Spanish we say en el parque, which means in the park. In English we would say at the park. So that's a slight difference between the Spanish and the English language. And then for she is in the park or at the park, we say
Ella está en el parque. Ella está en el parque.
And of course, for usted, we say usted está en el parque.
Usted está en el parque.
You are at the park. All right, next up is we are.
Nosotros, nosotras estamos. Nosotros, nosotras estamos.
So let's add these to our list as well. And as an example, when we say we are tired, and we're talking about a group of all males or a mixed group of genders, we say
Nosotros, cansados. Nosotros estamos cansados. Nosotros estamos cansados.
so OS. And because we're talking about a group of people, so not just one person, we don't say cansado, but we say cansados. So we add the S at the end. Now, if you would want to say nosotras estamos, then instead of saying cansados, we use obviously cansadas. So nosotras estamos cansadas. And again, notice that the verb itself never changes. So it doesn't become estamos. It always stays estamos.
Nosotras estamos cansadas. Nosotras estamos cansadas.
We are tired, if we were talking about all female group. Alright, the next conjugation, vosotros or vosotras, again used in Spain mostly.
Vosotros, vosotras estáis. Vosotros, vosotras estáis.
Again with the accent on the A. Again, we can add this to our list, and as you can see, the verb estar is not quite as irregular as the verb ser, because the verb estar keeps the same stem of the verb. So est, estoy, estás, está, it all begins with est. And with the verb ser, we saw that it changes from yo soy to tú eres, and él es, ella es, and so forth. Alright, so when we want to say, are you ready? We say,
Vosotros, listos. Vosotros, listos.
listo. To be listo is to be ready. So you could also use this word by itself and just say listos, which means are you ready or are you guys ready?
¿Vosotros estáis listos?
Are you ready?
¿Vosotros estáis listos?
Or of course, when we were talking about a female group, we say
¿Vosotras estáis listas? ¿Vosotras estáis listas?
are you ready? Alright, and then the last two conjugations, you are, and you being formal you in Spain, or you guys, or also formal in Latin America, is
Ustedes están. Ustedes están.
you are. So you are working is
Ustedes trabajando. Ustedes trabajando.
and the J at trabajando is not a J, not trabajando, but it's trabajando. We pronounce it as a G, trabajando.
Ustedes están trabajando.
You are working.
Ustedes están trabajando.
And again, to be working is not a characteristic, but it's a state. So we use the verb estar. Alright, and then the last conjugation, which is ellos están or ellas están. They are.
Ellos, ellas están. Ellos practicando yoga. Ellos practicando yoga.
They are practicing yoga. Again, we are talking about a state, practicing yoga. We're not going to do that all day, even though it would probably be good for us. So, ellos están practicando yoga.
Ellos están practicando yoga.
They are practicing yoga. Or, ellas están practicando yoga. They are practicing yoga.
Ellas están practicando yoga.
And now you might ask yourself, why does practicando not change into practicanda? And in this example, always whenever we see two verbs next to each other, it's always only the first verb that conjugates. So the second verb remains the same. So in this example, ellas están. So están comes from the full verb estar. So están is the conjugation in the ellas form for the verb estar. But practicando does not change depending on who it is that we were talking about, because it's the second verb. So only the first verb, estar, conjugates into están. Ellas están practicando.
Ellas están practicando yoga.
Alright, and then let's take another look at our list. So as we can see, the stem stays the same, and we add different endings to that stem. So estoy, estás, está, amos, ais, and an for ustedes and ellos, ellas. And I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the reason why the stem stays the same and the endings are different is actually because in Spanish there is 3 different types of verbs. There is verbs that end with AR, like estar, it ends with AR. We also have verbs that end in IR, and we have verbs that end with ER. And these all have different rules. So for example, the verbs that end with AR, so estar, anytime we see a verb that ends with AR, which is not very irregular, we use these endings that you see in yellow. Now I have a separate lesson about this, so I don't want to dive too deep into this, but maybe this is something interesting that from now on you'll pay a bit more closer attention to. And if you don't, that's also totally fine. Alright, so before we end this lesson, we have some practice sentences. So as always, if you want to practice, make sure to pause the video right now and then press play again once you're ready. And as you can see, add yo, cansado, and tú, listo. There's different ways of saying cansado. You can say cansado or cansada, and you can say listo or lista, depending on if you're talking to a woman or a man. Alright, so pause the video right now if you want to practice, and then press play again to see the answers. Alright, and these are the answers. Alright, and that's it for this lesson. We now learned the verb ser, which we use for characteristics, and the verb estar, which we use for states. So from now on, anytime we form a sentence and we want to say something like I am playing or I am from Europe, we want to stop for a second and think if we want to use the verb ser or the verb estar. And now we know which one to pick, because one is for characteristics and one is for states. Now sometimes you might be in a situation where something could potentially be both a characteristic or a state. In these instances, honestly, you could probably use both. So it's really up to you to decide which one you think fits well. But in most cases, in most sentences, it will be quite obvious which one to use. And over the next lessons ahead, we will also see example sentences in which we are asked and which will demonstrate if we use the verb ser or estar. Alright, that's it for this lesson. Again, you can find an overview of today's lesson as a PDF file on my website, SpanishWithWes.com. Link is in the description. For now, that's it for this lesson. I know that these 2 lessons might have been a bit intense because we went over so many different conjugations. So that's why in the next lesson, we will go over a blue lesson and we will learn some vocabulary. Alright, that's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Adios.